Finally.
Now, I've lived here in Idaho, Nampa actually, pretty much my whole life. My dad was rafting before I was born, so I've been rafting basically my whole life. Not necessarily on the water, but involved with whitewater, with interested in the equipment, you know, sending my dad off at the launch of a long trip, things like that. So, I've been really lucky. Now, when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, I started to think about what great things do I think we have here that maybe I didn't always realize how great they were. I started to think about the Payette River system here. And as soon as I thought of that, I had this memory of going down with my dad. I was about 13, and I was with a friend of mine who was also 13, and my dad, and he's rowing the boat, and we're passengers. And this was before my dad had upgraded to the self-bailing floor, so we have what we call a bucket boat. So the passenger has this immense responsibility of holding a bucket so they can bail the water out. And we're doing a run from Garden Valley to Banks. It's the staircase run of the South Fork, if you've heard of it. It's named after a rapid on there, but the memory is we go through this rapid, and it was awesome. The boat's just drenched, we're full of water. And we get through the rapid, we're done, I'm getting up, I'm getting ready to get the bucket, I wipe water out of my eyes, and I look back at my dad and go, that was awesome. And for this brief moment, I see kind of worry and maybe even fear on my dad's face, and it's just leaving, and he goes, yeah, that was different than I remembered it. And now, thinking back, that I realize that's just a normal thing. I've rafted a lot more, I've done a lot of other rivers, and rivers are never the same. The second time you do them than the last time you did them. They're always changing. And in this particular case, there had been a landslide a couple years before, and we hadn't done it, and it had totally changed this section of the river. And so going through it, my dad had been expecting a straightforward rapid, and it had become a totally different kind of technical rapid. I had no idea at the time, but now I've come to realize that that's just how it is. Rivers change, whether it's a landslide, whether it's the water level, or whether it's something little like it's just colder that day, so you want to run it different, you don't want to get splashed as much. The other thing that changes them, of course, is human interaction. So on the Payette River, there's some pretty extensive human interaction that I want to talk to you about. Originally, it's mining, and then logging, and then the building of a railroad, and later a highway on the river. So I want to first talk about basically the Payette and what it is today. So why it's so special, and kind of, when I'm talking to people who aren't used to it, I describe it as like a ski resort. So here's a map of the area from a guidebook, and all of these numbers are the launches for different runs in varying degrees. So this is why I say it's like a ski resort, because you have everything here from like a bunny hill, just straight flat water, to the most extreme double black diamond. People come from all over the world who consider themselves experts just to say they've done it, stretches of water. And so if you want to learn to kayak or you're interested in kayak, you have everything you need here, because you can get that introduction, and then you can always be working to get good enough to do the next more difficult stretch. But, so that's why people come here. But, you know, rafting hasn't always, it's a relatively new hobby, new sport. It hasn't always been a thing. Obviously, that's not the first reason that people came here. So originally it was mining. The Payette River system here wasn't necessarily the richest in gold, but it's the easiest way to get some equipment and things, so like Idaho City, where there was a lot of mining, and then up the Deadwood River here, there was quite a bit of mining. So you have a lot of people coming in, you've got to get equipment to them, they're trying to make their money, and the easiest way is not to go over the mountains, but up through the canyons. So that's where people first started to kind of pioneer trails through this area. Before it had just been the occasional trapper, and then there were some Native Americans in the area, but they used to participate to mostly anchor flatter plants. Oh, and there's actually a really interesting story with that mining. So there's Oxbow Rapid, which right here, it's named because it's an oxbow. It's actually a pretty big area. So miners had this, or a mining company had a great idea. They were going to drill a tunnel through here to divert the river through it, and then dig up the whole bottom and look for gold. So thankfully that didn't happen, but it's really interesting to look at how the perception of the river completely changed. Like looking at it as a source of money as opposed to a source of entertainment or beauty or something like that totally changes what you're willing to do. So then the next thing that really brings people in is logging. And you have these huge log drives down the river. Because upstream, you have these heavily forested areas with big old growth timbers. And you got to get them downstream where the mills are. So the easiest way is to throw them in the river and basically hope for the best. But you lose so much to log jams and things that you give birth to this, they're called them river hogs. They're the loggers who their job was to make sure the logs made it down the river. So here you've got, this is actually the first time that people are actually running and navigating these rapids, trying to get down them. So you even have sort of the development of rafting the river as a sport. Some guys would ride the logs through the tougher water just to say they did it. But it's also incredibly dangerous. One of the accounts I read said you had 4 people drowning a day doing this. And wasn't exactly the most practical. So the logging companies are looking for ways to make it safer and more economical. They don't want to lose as many logs, and they don't want to lose all their loggers and have to deal with the press and stuff like that. So one of the solutions, they bring in $100,000 worth of dynamite and decide they're just going to blow up all the rapids in this stretch. And it's actually the stretch that today it's the lower North Fork, and today it's the most intense, most premier whitewater, only attempted if you are an expert kind of run. In fact, it's known worldwide. I've never done it, but there's a launch for an easier one that's the takeout for the really hard one. I ran into people from Germany there one time that had flown here, shipped their kayaks, loaded them in a van, driven up, and that was their primary destination, and they were going to tour the rest of Idaho and try different rivers. So it actually has a lot more draw than I ever realized growing up here. It's just my backyard. So, but through that stretch, I mean, obviously it's like that today, so they didn't succeed, but they were going to just blow it out and make it smooth was their plan. They put down the logs. I think they lost half of the ones that they put in there, just got jammed up, stayed in the river somewhere. They had guys dying every day, and obviously that proved to be very impractical, so they started to push really hard for a railroad, which brings me to the Thunder Mountain Line. So here's the Thunder Mountain Line. It's still running today, but it's just a tourist thing. But originally, it was a big deal because you finally had kind of a practical way to move freight in and out of the area. And the big push, originally it was proposed and surveyed for the miners and the mining claims to, like I said, get freight through the area. But the claims all ran out and the money ran out before it was finished. So you had Frederick Weyerhaeuser, who, heard of like Weyerhaeuser, the lumber company today. It's the guy who, that's his namesake. So he owned a ton of the land up in the mountains that was forested and was making money off the logging. So it proved practical for him to have a way to get all his logs down. So he helped fund this railroad. And it just helped reduce the cost of transporting the logs for him. But it also was this first start of making this area really accessible to people that didn't have to be there. So you could be a passenger on this and go sightseeing and ride up to what's now McCall and things like that. And you're riding along this river. So then as you start to develop, as kayaking and rafting started to develop as a hobby, people started to know about this area and know about the rapids and get drawn there. So the next step on that is when they start to build the highways and the roads, you start to have a real big influx of boaters. People start to get to know it. That's what made having a guide company practical, because now people from Boise who didn't necessarily know how to raft still knew how to get there. And if they didn't, you could be driving up to McCall, and if you've ever taken the drive today, you've seen it's full of boats, bright colored boats. So in the 80s, when rafting was first starting to take off, you'd see a couple of guys and go, man, I want to do that. You could, just like today, and you look up, find a guide, go try it, go see if you take lessons, and then you're introduced to this great, basically ski resort of rafting. And just the highway that really made that possible. Now there's really interesting stories that are kind of the cannot confirm or deny stories of these early guides when they were building, and the raft pioneers, when they're building these roads. Supposedly they would go out with their crowbars and digging bars at night when the road crews weren't there and try and knock the rocks into the river so that they could make a rapid of their own, and could always say that that's my rapid, or that boulder right there that you have to dodge when you raft by, that's me, I put that there. But you hear them all over, but people say they know who did it, but it may be as much a myth as it is fact. It probably is. But, so with that, oh, and here's the highways, excuse me. So this is the Rainbow Bridge over the North Fork, and you've probably seen it. So this is one of the big undertakings. So, as you see, the way that people use the rivers and the way that they view those rivers drastically change the nature of the river itself. So it's not just the landslides and the flood and the drought that changes the river. It's much how we use the river and what we want to use the river for. So can't have any idea what the river is going to be 100 years from now, but I know that I'm really lucky to have experienced it the way it is now. Thank you.